I waited for him for years. Every morning, every knock on the door, every whisper of the wind. I believed it might be him coming back. But the regime didn't bring my son back. It brought silence. And a letter. This is the story of my desperate search, of the last letter I received, and of what I found when I went to Belene, the place where time stands still and memory fades. I went where no one else dared to go, and what I found there still lives with me. If you are a mother, if you have ever lost someone, if you have ever felt what it is like to scream into a void, this story is for you. Watch until the end. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that deserve to be told. They came to get Ivan one morning when the fog seemed thicker than usual. The whole village was still asleep, except for me. I knew something was going to happen. It wasn't a premonition. It was the silence of the early morning that screamed louder than any siren. I heard heavy footsteps on the dirt road, boots marching with the precision of someone who wasn't there to talk. I didn't have time to wake him. They knocked on the door as if they wanted to break it down, and before I could open my mouth, one of the men was pointing at him with a piece of paper in his hand, a warrant stamped by the state. Ideological subversion, they said. Ivan was 18 years old. He didn't even resist. He was barefoot, his hair still wet from the shower, and he was wearing the shirt his grandmother had embroidered last summer. I remember shouting his name as they walked through the wooden gate. He looked back quickly, without saying anything, but his eyes, my son's eyes, were apologizing for something he didn't even understand. I'll never forget that. For days, weeks, I knocked on police station doors, sent letters to the capital, looked for priests, lawyers, anyone who could tell me where he was. No one knew, no one answered, until an old man from the market said to me in a low voice, "If he was taken without a trial, it's Belene." That hit me like a sentence. Belene's arrest, the cursed island. I knew the stories, but I never thought that my son. His first letter arrived 2 months later. It was just a sheet of paper folded in 4, with his handwriting shaky, as if he had written it in secret. He said he was alive. He apologized for not being able to say where he was, but he spoke of a damp place, where the Danube could be seen in the distance and the sound of shouting came from all sides. "Mother, time doesn't pass here, and when it does, it takes men with it." He spoke of a commander named Mitkov. He said that this man personally selected prisoners for special tasks. No one knew what these tasks were. All they knew was that those who went never came back. Ivan said that he did everything he could to appear weak, sick, invisible. "Mom, being noticed here is the same as being chosen to disappear." I read it and felt my heart tighten so much that it seemed like I wouldn't be able to make it to the end of the letter. The second letter came almost half a year later. It was different, darker, not with ink, but with soul. He said he hadn't seen the sky in weeks, that they were digging something on the northern part of the island. It's like a buried cellar, something old. I think it was from before the prison. He spoke of voices, but not of the prisoners. Little voices, like children calling out the names of the inmates in the dark. He said that many of them were starting to go crazy, that they were daydreaming, and that some of them were starting to forget their own names. By the third letter, he no longer called me mother. He wrote, "Madam," and he signed himself, "Prisoner number 74. That killed me. The regime didn't just take my son from me. It erased my name from his memory. It erased the love that existed. It erased his identity. That's what Belene did. I tried to enter the island. I tried to bribe soldiers. I was threatened. Once a sergeant grabbed me by the arm and whispered in my ear, "Do you want to end up like him? Do you want to be buried without a name too?" I walked home barefoot. My legs were shaking, but a certainty grew inside me. Ivan was still there, and he could still be saved. Years passed. One letter, and then nothing. I began writing every month, 32 letters, never answered, none returned. It was like writing to the bottom of the sea. Then, one morning in September, I received a different envelope. Yellowed paper, sealed with the symbol of the Camp 4 administration. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I recognized the handwriting, but it wasn't a letter. It was a request, a confession, a last attempt to leave something on record before it was forgotten. He wrote, "If this letter reached you, maybe I'm not here anymore. Or maybe I am, but not like before. Mother, I'm not me anymore. Every day I forget a part of what made me Ivan. They buried us alive, and now the earth is starting to accept us." It took me days to pluck up the courage to reread that last letter. It was folded up inside the drawer where I keep my old photos, right under the frame, with the photograph of him at 10 years old, holding a fish that his father helped catch. In that image, Ivan was still smiling with his 2 crooked front teeth, and his feet were covered in mud. It was summer. It was freedom. It was the boy I raised. Now what was left of him fit on a sheet of paper with words that no longer seemed his. With each reading, the feeling grew that the person writing was no longer my son, but a shadow of him. The authorities said he had never been to Belene. When I went to the regional committee office, they looked at me like I was crazy. There is no Ivan Petrov on the entry list, or the exit list. That was when I realized the worst. Perhaps he had never officially existed. Not to the regime, not on the records, only to me. I looked for former prisoners, people who had made it out of that hellhole alive. One of them, an old man with a face as wrinkled as burnt leather, spoke softly, as if the air around him was still guarded. He said he had seen the number 74. I don't remember his name. No one used names there, but I remember his eyes. Young, quiet. He dug all day long, never complained. I asked him if he knew what they were digging for. He shook his head. It wasn't dirt. It was time. "What do you mean, time?" I asked. Because what they were opening was not from this time. I wanted to scream, but I held myself back. That sentence echoed. I began to write everything down. Every detail of the letters, every memory, every piece of Ivan's childhood. I created a diary, as if it were possible to sew his soul back together with words. It was my way of keeping him alive, even if the world wanted to forget him. Then I received an unexpected visitor, a young history student named Kaloyan. He had heard about my search from an old article I had published in a Sofia newspaper. He said he was researching the disappeared of Belene for his thesis. When I told him about Ivan, his eyes widened. Number 74 appears in secret reports, always nameless, always involved in classified tasks. I showed him the letter. He trembled as he read it. I said there was a theory among scholars of communist repression, that Belene was not just a punishment camp, but also a place of experiments. Not medical, not scientific, but psychological. They wanted to see how far a human being could be erased. Erase identity, erase ties, erase even the memory of one's own face. "And what happens when you forget who you are?" I asked. Kaloyan replied without hesitation, "You cease to exist." We began searching through the declassified files. Many had been burned, but others were simply hidden under layers of bureaucracy. We found an internal report dated 1972. In it, a handwritten entry read, "Prisoner 74. Subject exhibits unusual resistance to memory loss. Request for transfer to Blue Cell." I asked what Blue Cell was. Kaloyan looked at me and said, "Nobody knows. It's mentioned in 3 reports. And then, never again. The Blue Cell." I spent nights thinking about that name. It sounded cold, clinical, like a cell that doesn't imprison the body, but the mind. I remembered the phrase from the letter, "The earth begins to accept us." What if the Blue Cell wasn't just a place? What if it was a stage? A state in which they stopped being prisoners and became something else? The questions consumed me, but nothing prepared me for what I found weeks later, in a rusty box at the old post office, where old, undelivered letters awaited their destination. One of the boxes was marked in faded ink, "Belene, unprocessed returns." Among hundreds of torn envelopes and damp papers, there was one with my name on it. I shivered. It was his handwriting, but it was different. as if each letter had been drawn with fear. Inside was a nearly blank sheet of paper, and just 3 sentences. They opened the blue cell. Now it's alive, and I am part of it. I had to read those 3 sentences dozens of times to believe they were there. It didn't make sense. How could a cell be alive? And how could someone become part of it? The hand holding the paper trembled as if it had been exposed to the cold of the Danube, even though I was indoors, locked in, with the windows covered with blankets. I didn't tell anyone about that letter, not even Kaloyan. It felt like more than a clue. It felt like a warning. Still, I stuck with it. Kaloyan discovered that during the 1970s, some areas of Belene were missing from official camp maps. Entire sections of the prison were not listed even in the internal records. Rooms were unnumbered. Tunnels were not catalogued. There were even scattered mentions of underground facilities, built on the direct orders of high-ranking Central Committee figures. One such document, dated 1974, mentioned a sector with a capacity for 20 inmates, but there was no entrance listed. No doors, no cells, just the name of the sector, Blue Area. It was Kaloyan who connected the dots. The blue cell was part of the blue area, and everything indicated that it was underground. The darkest hypothesis was that they used this place as a laboratory for extreme sensory isolation. They locked the prisoners away without light, sound, contact, or time, until there was nothing left but the body. And even then, some said that the body also began to disappear, as if, by erasing the memory, the matter lost its meaning. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at Ivan's picture on the wall. I started talking to him. Simple things. That I still wore the blue blouse he said made me look young. That I still made that lemon tea he hated. That the rocking chair still creaked the same way. I cried softly, asking him not to let himself pass out. I asked him to resist. And then, I heard it. A faint noise, behind the wall. Like a breath. I thought it was all in my head. But over the next few days, it continued. I began to hear small knocks, always at the same time. 3 in the morning. Always 3 knocks, like some kind of code. I didn't tell anyone. I began to answer. I would knock back on the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing happened. But with each passing night, I had more vivid dreams. I dreamed of wet hallways, narrow staircases, an iron door with the words, Sector 4, Blue Cell, written on it. And at the end of the dream, I would always hear his voice, faint, like a distant echo. Don't forget me. Afraid I was going crazy, I took the letters to a historian who specializes in war trauma. She said the writing style in the last few letters wasn't just that of a tired mind. It was that of someone being tricked into forgetting. There were abrupt pauses, pronoun confusion, shifts in verb tense. She said it was typical of victims of sensory deprivation experiments. But the strangest thing was her final observation. This style seems to have been contaminated by another kind of language, as if he had begun to think collectively rather than individually. Collective how? I asked. She stared at the letter and replied, as if he were no longer just one, but many, as if the cell itself were writing with him. I put everything back in the box and walked to the river. I spent hours watching the current. I imagined my son somewhere on that island, walking among the abandoned pavilions, perhaps now without remembering his own name, perhaps hearing the voices of other mothers in dreams that were not his. It was then that I made the decision. I would go to Belene, with or without permission. Kaloyan tried to dissuade me. He said the island was still military territory, that entering without permission was dangerous, but I would listen to no one else. I took a train to Pleven, then a truck to Nikopol, and finally paid a fisherman to take me by boat to the shore of the island. The sky was overcast. The river seemed thicker than usual. When I disembarked, the air smelled strange, not of rot, but of old iron. I walked along the trails left in the tall grass. I found moss-covered ruins, corroded metal sheds, and a fallen tower where bits of a siren could still be seen. Nothing moved. Not even the birds dared to sing. The island seemed frozen in time. as if all the suffering that had been deposited there was still embedded in the stones. I reached the old prison gate. It was open. On the ground, a fallen sign read, "Forbidden Zone. State property." I went in. The sound of my own footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, as if I were walking through a dead lung. The main building was partially in ruins, but still had its structure. There were charcoal inscriptions on the walls, dates scratched out, names that went on and on. In each cell, the silence seemed heavier than the rusty bars. There were no beds, no mattresses, just cement and marks in the corners, as if someone had spent a long time kneeling there. In the fourth cell on the left, I found a spoon. It was carved with the number 74. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I knelt down, holding that spoon like it was a sacred artifact. It was his. It had to be. My son had been there. My Ivan. And somehow, something of him was still there too. I stood up slowly, my eyes burning with tears. I kept walking. I passed through corridors where daylight barely reached. There were boarded-up doors nailed to the inside. Some looked as if they had been sealed in a hurry, as if to prevent something from getting out. On one of them, written in what looked like dried blood, was the phrase, "Does not remember, does not suffer." I almost backed away, but kept going. At the end of one of the corridors, I found a spiral staircase leading down. It was narrow, made of iron, and slippery. The smell changed as I went down. It was not rotten, but metallic. And there was dampness, drops that fell rhythmically, like an old clock marking the time that no longer passed there. When I reached the bottom step, I found myself facing a concrete door. There was only a faded blue mark on it. No number, no lock. I pushed hard. It gave way. The air inside was colder, thicker, as if something were waiting. The space was a long, curved corridor like a ring. Small cells were arranged like segments of a circle. Inside each one, markings on the walls, scratches, words in different languages, repeating symbols. I began to read. I am what remains. They are with me. We are not one. Time no longer belongs to me. And on one of the walls, as if carved with one's own fingers, I read, "Mother, do you still remember me?" My knees gave way. I fell to the ground. My breath held, as if a weight was crushing my chest. That was him. It was Ivan. The handwriting was shaky, but recognizable. He had been there, and he was waiting for me. His question hit me like a blade. Because yes, I remembered. Every day. But what about him? I walked to the center of that underground circle. On the ground, a round mark, like a symbol burned into the stone. A spiral that seemed to move, even though it was still. I stared at it and felt something strange. A dizziness. A sense of displacement. As if my mind was beginning to slip out of me. That was when I heard, for the first time, the voice. It wasn't a sound. It was something more intimate, more direct, like a thought that wasn't mine. "Mother." I jumped up and looked around. There was no one there, but the voice came back. Clearer now, closer. "Mom, I don't know who I am anymore, but I know you remember." I began to scream. Ivan, it's me, I'm here." My echo was lost in the curved walls. Silence. Then the voice came again. Softer, more drawn out. I tried to remember, but every time I remember, they pull me back. Here, where time doesn't exist. I fell to my knees again. My toes touched the cold floor, and a part of me felt like I was crossing a line I shouldn't have. That here, inside that structure, it wasn't just bodies that were trapped. It was souls, memories, identities. I began to pray, not because I thought anyone would hear, but because it was the only thing left. It was then that I saw it. At the end of the circular corridor, one of the cells was ajar. I walked over to it. The door creaked as if it were opening for the first time in decades. Inside, a wall with words written in charcoal. If I forget myself, find me. If I erase myself, read me. If I lose myself, shout my name. 3 times. 3 times, I shouted. Ivan? Nothing. Ivan? Silence. Ivan? The floor shook. The lights, if they were lights, flickered. A low sound filled the space, like breathing coming from the walls. And then, in the shadows of the cell, I saw something. A figure hunched over, huddled in the corner. I slowly raised the flashlight. The face was covered with long hair, the skin pale as paper, the hands with deep marks on the palms. When he raised his head, I saw the eyes. They were his. They were my son's eyes, but there was no name on them anymore. It took me seconds that seemed like hours to believe what I was seeing. Those eyes pierced me as if they were searching for something they could no longer name. There was no fear in them, no pain, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness you only see in people who have been ripped from themselves. I approached slowly, my heart racing, as if any sudden movement could dissolve that image before me. "Even," I whispered. No answer. He just stared at me, his head tilted as if trying to place something in my face, as if part of him felt he had seen me before. In another life, perhaps. His lips moved, soundlessly, and then he pointed to the floor. There was a line drawn in charcoal, like a barely closed circle, inside which were engraved broken words, names cut off, sentences that ended abruptly. It looked like the desperate effort of someone fighting against oblivion. I touched his hand. It was cold. Not like a corpse, but like something no longer kept warm by ordinary life. He didn't flinch, but he didn't react either. His fingers closed over mine slowly, hesitantly, as if the action had come from far, far away. And it was in that touch that something inside me snapped. I was there. I had found my son, but at the same time, I hadn't found him. "Do you remember me?" I asked, my voice breaking. He blinked slowly. His lips moved once more. A faint sound escaped, a single syllable. "Ma." Yes, it was him. There was still something there. A spark. "It's me, Ivan. Mom. Do you remember our house? The fig tree in the yard? The smell of bread on Sunday? The blue blouse that you said made me look younger?" He closed his eyes. A tear slowly fell, but his shoulders began to tremble. Not with emotion, with fear. His body shrank as if something invisible was pressing down on him from within. He gripped my hand tightly now and whispered, barely audible, "They listen when I remember." And then a metallic sound echoed behind me. I turned in a jump. Nothing there. But the walls, they pulsed, as if they were breathing. A heavy air began to spread. Ivan was shaking. His eyes were looking beyond me now, at something I couldn't see. "We have to get out of here," he said. He didn't move. "You come with me. Let's go home, now." I grabbed his shoulders, trying to lift him up, but it was like trying to lift a statue. His feet felt stuck to the ground. Then he said something that froze me. "If I leave, they come too." "What? Who?" He didn't answer. He just pointed to the ceiling. I looked. There was a circular hole above, like a sealed air vent. From it came a low, continuous hum, as if 1,000 voices were whispering at once. Voices that didn't form words, but feelings. Anxiety, grief, disorientation. It was as if those voices were wandering, trapped between shattered memories, trying to piece together a collective identity made from scraps of pain. The light from the flashlight began to fail. The space around me grew dark. I held Ivan tighter and pulled. "It doesn't matter. If they come, I'll fight them. But you're coming with me. You're my son." Then he spoke clearly for the first time. "If I leave, I will forget again. Out there, I die again. Here, at least, I am still something. No. Out there, you are my son. Out there is the sky, the field, your room, your name. Ivan, listen. I have waited for you, all these years." But he was no longer listening. He stared into space. He mumbled incoherent things. Fragments. Excerpts from books. Names of childhood friends. Songs without endings. It was as if his mind was being pulled in all directions. Then something new happened. A crack began to appear on the wall to the left. It didn't split the concrete like a normal crack. It oozed. It was as if the wall was weeping black ink. The sound intensified. Now voices were saying, "He's ours," in Old Bulgarian, in Russian, in German, and even in languages I didn't recognize. The cell shook. I held his face between my hands. I shouted, "You are Ivan Petrov, Elena's son, born in 1958. You had a dog named Rumen. You fell off the roof at the age of 7 and cried for 3 days. You are my son." He blinked. His eyes lit up for a second. And in that second, I saw the boy he had been. I saw Ivan, my Ivan, and he whispered, "Mom." But the fissure opened wide. A blue flash illuminated the cell. A high-pitched sound filled everything. I covered my ears and fell to my knees. When I opened my eyes again, he was gone. There was only the spoon, lying on the circle of coal, and the whisper, now coming from inside my own mind. "Now you remember for both of us." I remained motionless for minutes, perhaps hours, with the spoon in my hands, sitting on the cold floor of that cell where my son had disappeared once again. But this time, not far away. He had disappeared inside me. I didn't know how to explain it, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was charged with something, as if his presence had merged with my own thoughts. Every step I took outside the cell seemed to echo twice, once inside me, once somewhere I could no longer reach with my eyes. I left that circular corridor without looking back. Something told me that if I looked, I wouldn't be able to get out, that I would be sucked into that spiral of oblivion and pain. I returned to the rusty stairs, now with trembling legs, short of breath, and distorted senses. The air seemed thicker, the light, more distant. With each step, voices, but not other people's voices. It was always the same, Ivan's, reminding me of details that he should have forgotten, but now they appeared mixed in with mine. "Mom, remember the tree we fell on? Mom, you laughed when you spilled soup. Mom, Dad slept with his hand on the book." And I responded, in silence, with tears. When I finally left the underground entrance and returned to the surface of the prison, the sky was already tinged with a dull, almost sickly orange hue. The sun tried to break through the clouds, but all that could get through was a pale light, almost like the light of a bad dream about to end. There was silence, a silence of sick earth. Grass grew among the rubble, but nothing moved. No birds, no wind. The world there seemed suspended. I walked toward the gate. My footsteps left marks in the wet mud, but I could not hear the sound of them. It was as if I was no longer fully present. When I reached the shore, the fisherman was still waiting for me, but he looked at me with an expression of contained fear. "You took too long." I looked at him but didn't answer. I just got on the boat. On the way back, he didn't say a word, and neither did I. But inside me, his presence pulsed, like a living memory, as if Ivan were seeing me with my own eyes. It was more than a memory. It was as if part of his mind was now inside mine. When I got home, I locked myself away for days, not out of fear, but because the world no longer seemed the same. Everything had a slight delay, a subtle shift. I started to write, to record every detail of the trip, of the cell, of the voice, of the spiral, and mainly, of the memories. But then something strange started to happen. In the following nights, I dreamed of things that weren't mine, places I'd never been, names I didn't know, experiences that clearly weren't from my life, but that I felt with the same intensity as my own memories. I saw an old man being tortured until he forgot his wife's name. I saw a woman holding a picture of her daughter whom she no longer recognized. I saw a boy drawing a sun on a dark wall until he ran out of charcoal. And all these people were inside the same cell, inside the same blue cell. I then understood what Ivan meant. "Now you remember for both of us. Or maybe for all of them." I looked for Kaloyan. I showed him everything I had written. He read each page in silence. When he finished, he was pale. "You need to publish this," he said. "The world needs to know what they did in Belene. Not just the bodies, but the memories. They murdered existence. But I hesitated, because I knew that if I published it, something would be exposed, something that might still be alive, something that might not be named. Because names, in that prison, were a threat. They erased names to erase souls. And if I named them again, would that bring it back? Nevertheless, I sent the manuscript to a small independent newspaper. A month later, it ran as a 4-page article. The simple title was, "The Son Who Never Returned, Fragments from Belene Prison." I did not use my real name. I signed myself as Mother of 74. On the same day of publication, I received a letter. No sender, thick paper, folded with military precision. Inside, just one sentence. He remembers. The letter sat on the table for days. He remembers. 2 words that seemed to carry the weight of an entire existence. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was in the room, but when I turned on the light, everything was silent. Sometimes the lamp would turn on by itself. Sometimes the pages of the manuscript I had left on the desk would appear rearranged, as if someone had read them. And then I realized, he wasn't just in me, he was here. Ivan, or what was left of him, had not stayed in Belene. Or maybe Belene had never been just a physical place. The cell, the circle, the spiral. It was a mechanism, a machine made to absorb. And somehow, part of him got through. Because he was the only one who remembered until the end. Because he wrote. Because he left traces. And because I responded. I began to notice other changes. When I visited the village market, some older women looked at me strangely. One of them, who had never spoken to me before, took my hand and said, "You went there, didn't you?" When I asked her what she meant, she just shook her head. "Belene has a price, and you paid it." I left without answering. Kaloyan, now obsessed with history, returned to the island with a small group. It took me days to learn what had happened. When he returned, he seemed different. His eyes were sunken, his speech more slow, as if simple words required effort. He took me aside and said, almost in a whisper, "The blue cell is not a place. It is an echo, an organism. It lives off those who remember, and devours those who forget." "But why Ivan? Why did he resist so much?" I asked. Kaloyan stared at me, as if the answer was obvious. "Because he had you." Those words broke me irreversibly, because I understood that, in that hell, the only weapon against absolute oblivion was love, the bond, the insistent reminder of who you are and who you belong to. And Ivan held on to that until the end. And when he couldn't anymore, he passed it on to me. Time passed. The story gained momentum. Small newspapers mentioned it, then human rights groups. Soon, universities began asking for interviews. But I refused them all. Not because I didn't want to tell the story, but because I knew no one would understand enough to really listen. Only those who have lost someone without a body, without a tombstone, without a date, without an answer, understand what it means to continue remembering alone. And it was on one of those cloudy mornings, with a white sky and no wind, that I received another envelope. Different. This one came from the National Archives. Inside, a black and white photo, undated. An underground corridor. In the bottom corner, a prisoner kneeling by the wall. And there, with charcoal in hand, writing something. The image was blurry, but the number embroidered on the back of the shirt was clear. 74. But that wasn't what gave me the chills. It was what he'd written on the wall. "If I forget, read it for me." The same words that had been in that cell. The same words that now seemed to have leapt from the stone onto my skin. I turned the photo over. On the back was a handwritten note, written by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Record recovered from blue area. Last known image of subject 74. The only one who remained lucid to the end. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I felt like he had won. Because now, everyone knew that he existed, that he resisted, that he had a name, that he was loved. The following week, I was invited to a ceremony on the island. The authorities had decided, after popular pressure, to install a memorial to the missing people of Belene. I agreed to go. I brought the spoon with the number carved on it. I brought the copy of the letter. I brought the photo. And I brought the memories that no one could take away from me. The crossing was silent. The boat glided along the Danube as if the river already knew that pain. Arriving at the shore, time seemed to have stopped. The ruins were there, but different. There was life among them. Birds returning. A gentle wind. And where the corroded gate had once stood, now stood a stone plaque with the words, "Here sleep the names that they tried to erase, but memory never shuts up." I knelt down. I placed the spoon under the stone, and I closed my eyes. And then, like a breath coming from deep within the earth, I heard it, not with my ears, with what was left of what I had been, and what he still is. Ivan's voice. "Mom, now." I remember too. I returned home with my soul split into two halves, one still mine, the other mixed with his. The world outside seemed to move on, with its noises, its rush, its daily forgetfulness. But inside me, there was another time, another space, where memory was still sacred, where the name Ivan still carried weight, where the last letter had never been the last, because now it was just the beginning of a vigil that would never end. The nights continued to be long, but different. The dreams stopped being ghosts and started being encounters. In some, he was back as a child, running barefoot through the yard, laughing with his hands dirty with dirt. In others, he was the 18-year-old, standing in the doorway, silent, with his eyes saying more than any words. And sometimes, he was just a figure in the shadows, a presence beside me while I wrote, as if he were reading with me what he himself could never say. I kept writing, for him, for myself, for those who had not yet returned, for those who no one remembers anymore. Every name that came to me by letter, by phone call, by whisper from some desperate mother, I wrote down. I wrote down carefully, as if each letter were a thread of memory being sewn back into the world. It was my way of resisting the great machine of forgetfulness that Belene represented. And it was on one of those rainy, dull days that I received a package with no sender. Inside was an old notebook, with a hard cover and pages stained by time. I opened it with trembling hands. On the first page there was only this: Diary, Blue Cell. The rest of the pages were a tangle of voices, written in different handwritings: men, women, young, old. Fragmented accounts, loose memories, obsessive repetitions of dates, places, smells, names. It was as if, somewhere in the darkness, they had begun to write together, as a final act of those fighting against erasure. Among those pages, one in particular paralyzed me. 74 saw a light, but the light was not an exit. It was a memory. A memory has a smell. It has a sound. It has a mother. A memory has a name. And just below, in clear handwriting, drawn firmly, almost like a written whisper, Ivan Petrov, son of Elena, born in 1958. I cried like I had never cried before, because now, there, in the midst of so many erased voices, he wrote his own name, with every letter, with all his soul. He remembered. He rebuilt himself inside. And maybe, somehow, by remembering him for so long, I brought him back, even if only in words, even if only in charcoal strokes. Today, the complete manuscript of Ivan's story is kept in the Belene Memorial. But that is not what matters. What matters is that every time someone passes by that stone, they read his name among the forgotten. And by doing so, even without knowing it, they are continuing what I began. Remembering. Because remembering is resisting. Remembering is bringing back. Remembering is not letting them kill twice. And as long as there is someone who speaks my son's name, he will not be lost. Sometimes I sit on the porch and look at the sky. There are nights when a light breeze touches my face, and a phrase whispers inside me, with the same tenderness of an old hug. Now, Mother, I remember everything. If this story touched you, comment, I remember, and share it with those who should never be forgotten. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that deserve to be told.